Adela's advice. At last, Adela requested the floor and spoke. You all know that I was 3 years a burgmaid. You also know that I was chosen to become folk mother, and that I did not wish to become mother as I desired to marry a Pole. But what you do not know is that I have studied all that has occurred, just as if I were a true folk mother. I have long traveled far and wide to see what was happening. In this way, many things have been revealed to me that others do not know. You said yesterday that our kinsfolk on the other side of the Weser were docile and cowardly. But I can tell you that the Magus did not conquer a single district by force of arms, but solely through deceitful intrigue, and still more through the greed of the military leaders and noblemen. Freya said we should not allow unfree people to dwell among us. But what have they done? They have imitated our enemy, for instead of killing their prisoners or setting them free, they have ignored Freya's guidance and used them as slaves. Because they did so, Freya could no longer watch over them. They took the freedom of another, and that is why they have lost their own freedom. But you knew all of this already. However, I will tell you how, by degrees, they sank so low. The wives of the Finns bore children. These grew up with our Freya children. At times they played and cheered together around the home, or sat with one another before the hearth. There they listened eagerly to the outrageous sagas of the Finns, because they were frank and new. That is how they lost their identity as Freya, despite the authority of their parents. When the children grew up and saw that the children of the Finns could not use weapons and could only toil, a disdain for work flourished among them, and they grew very haughty. Chieftains and their best sons laid down with promiscuous Finn girls. Their own daughters, led astray by this bad example, allowed themselves to be impregnated by the best-looking Finn boys, in mockery of their vile parents. When the Magus understood this, he selected the best-looking of his Finns and Magyars and promised them mountains of gold if they could find a place among our people and then spread his doctrine. But his people went further. Children were kidnapped and taken to the Uppsalans, and when they had been brought up in his evil ways, they were sent back. Because these seeming slaves spoke our language, they were able to get the military leaders and nobles on board, saying that they must submit to the Magus so their sons could succeed them without election by the folk. Those who for their good deeds had gained a front yard for their house were promised a backyard on behalf of the Magus. Those who had already earned a front and backyard were promised a surrounding yard, and who had a surrounding yard, a whole estate. If the nobles were still loyal Freyas, the manipulators changed course and aimed at the degenerate sons. Yesterday, some among you suggested that we mobilize all of our folk to force the eastern states back to the old customs. But, in my humble opinion, that would fail miserably. Just imagine if our cattle here had previously been plagued by a serious lung disease that was still raging elsewhere. Would you then risk allowing your healthy animals to go amongst their sick ones? Surely not. Because all must agree and affirm that this would lead to nothing but trouble, who then would be so reckless as to dare to send his children into the midst of an utterly depraved folk? If you were to ask me, I would advise you before anything else to elect a new folk mother. I am aware that this is problematic because, of the 13 burgmaids who yet remain, No less than 8 desire the honor. But I would take no notice of this. Tunita, maid of the burg Mediasblick, never aspired to it, though she is full of wisdom and clarity, and as loyal to her folk and our ways as all others combined. I would also counsel you to go to the burgs and copy all the laws, Freya's texts, all of the histories, and everything else you can find on the walls, so that nothing is lost if the burgs are destroyed. It is written there that the folk mother and each burg maid shall have, besides helpers and messengers, 21 maidens and 7 maiden apprentices. Were I to add something, it would be to write, and as many worthy daughters to study as the burgs can house. Because I speak from my heart, and time shall prove me right. If you want your children to remain true Freyas, not to be conquered by either intrigue or force of arms, then make sure your daughters become real Freya women. Teach the children how great our lands once were, what a great people our ancestors were, how great we still are compared to others. Tell them of the heroes, of their heroic deeds, and of distant sea voyages. These tales must be told at the hearth, around the homestead or anywhere else, in times of joy or tears. But for it to be etched into their minds and hearts, the teachings must flow from the lips of your wives and daughters. Adela's advice was followed.